This week, we have a Victorian Christmas ghost story set in Cornwall, full of wit and humor that turns out not like you'd have imagined. So lurking within the scenic fields and hedges of Cornwall tales of curious vicar and ghostly legends bring a festive twist to the Christmas season. Clara Farmers. The Vicar's Ghost invites you on a whimsical journey through a Victorian caper, where nothing is as it seems, and surprises join Clara, Henry, and Aunt Agnes as they uncover a truth as hidden as a silver sixpence in a Christmas pudding, with hints that Victorian times might have been more progressive than we usually believe. I am Tony Walker of the Classic Ghost Stories podcast, and this is The Vicar's Ghost by Clara Farah. Everybody dies, don't they? The Vic's Ghost by Clara Farmer, Chapter 1. A mysterious visitor. It was a half-promise to my Aunt Agnes of Port Murrie that I wouldn't relate the incidents of the scare we had at the vicarage until the trouble had blown over. But as the whole business is now settled and done with, I feel released from my engagement and may explain the awful mystery folks down Pomey Way tried to laugh us out of countenance, but Aunt Agnes, whose married name is Jacka, the terribly suggestive name of donkeys and how they never had any children, is easy to account for. Aunt Agnes told me the whole story, and it came true almost to my face. Andrew Jacka, I nearly put 2 more letters on his name, was, when alive, the gardener at the vicarage where I spent last Christmas tide with little Henry. Our eldest in Cornwall, the place is very pretty in a valley near the sea. The church is quite a show building, and the tower is built perpendicular, as they call it there, and of course anyone can see that it's no wonder if it was horizontal. Oh, there would be something remarkable in it. We reached the lodge which Mrs. Jack and my aunt still inhabits, and found a hearty welcome, a Christmas welcome I may call it. And truly so, there were all kinds of hollies and eyes and red berries galore. A delicious smell of mince meat and apples, quite appetizing. And a tea table spread out in a way which made me imagine that my late uncle was not so deserving of those 2 extra letters as I had fancied. He couldn't have been that kind and have left his widow so comfortable and not even in black. For him, we were early at tea after our journey and were just gossiping, when a knock came to the door and little Henry ran up to open it. He ran back quite quick enough, looking scared a bit, and saying, "Mommy, it's a man at the door, a clergyman." "Well, he won't eat you, child," cried my aunt, quick like. Don't be a goose. I didn't quite like her manner of speaking to the boy. Though having no children of her own, I could excuse her. But she rose up and went to the door in the dusk. She hadn't gone long, when she came back with a red face, ruffling like a turkey, making all allowances for genders, and without a word, catches little Henry a slap on the shoulder blade. "Here, Aunt Agnes." "What's this?" I cried. "What's Henry done?" "I won't have him beat by anyone, except his father. So they're a bit of a brat to invent such untruths," she exclaimed. "If it was my child, I'd pound him." "Well, he isn't your child, Anunt, and as you never had one, you can't be expected to understand." "Wasn't there anyone there, dear?" I said to him as he ran to my side. "Yes, Mommy," he whispered. "I saw him, a man." "Henry, yes, a clergyman, a tall man with a red face like hers." "It's the truth," he pointed to Aunt Agnes, who didn't much relish the reference. "I'm sure the child did see the man," Aunt said. He wouldn't tell a falsehood, would you?" "Henry, I saw him," said the lad firmly. He had a whip in his hand and spurs, golden spurs, on his boots. "Mercy on us," screamed my Aunt Agnes. "He's come, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear." She began to rock herself backwards and forwards like a seesaw, her apron thrown over her head and groaning all the time as if in pain, a hee-ho kind of complaint, which came from her husband's side. Perhaps most likely, I didn't heed her greatly, for after her behavior to the boy, I didn't care very much about her fright, though I will not deny it. curious to find out the cause, mind. It was rather fearsome. We two lone women in the lodge beside the wood of a darkening winter evening. Well on towards Christmas, the 19th of December. It was no one nearer than the vicarage up the long avenue, and a ghostly, creepy feeling in the rustling trees. Oh, it was creepy after a while as the fire burned up more cheerful and had made little Henry shut the door. Aunt Agnes took her apron off her head and looked around. "Come here," she said. Looking at Henry, he wouldn't stir. She called him again. "I won't hurt you, you little silly," continued my aunt. "Come here, I want you. Go, Henry. Auntie won't hit you again." "I'll be bound," says I firm, like she looked at me steadily, as if scenting the battle afar off. But there was no fight. "I didn't mean to hurt you, child," said she, patting Henry's cheek in quite a motherly way. "Here's a 6p for a Christmas box in advance." "It wasn't your fault, child. I'm sorry I touched you. Kiss Auntie Henry. She's made you a nice present. There's a boy. Well, Aunt, what's happened?" said. "I don't ask me." "Clara, I can't tell you. It's too dreadful. Anyway," she whispered, "of course." I knew quite well that this was only put off a little pressing. Only was wanted. But I wasn't going to press her. So changed the subject to something else. To my great surprise, she went on quietly along the new track, and never breathed a syllable about the queer visitor as long as Henry sat up. It was a clear, cold, moonlit night. As I took Henry up in the little bed in my room, I could see the moon shining, and when I put the candle out, the room was quite light. Henry promised to go to sleep, and so I left him just closing the door so that we might hear him. If he called out, I found Aunt Agnes in the sitting room, knitting as I come in. She put her needles down in her lap and looked at me steadily over a tour of shell spectacles. "Well, Clara, well, Aunt, what's the matter? Isn't it terrible? Aren't you afraid? Afraid of what?" And I cried in surprise. "What's terrible? Why, that man, why, who is he? Does he live here?" "Live here, Clara? Listen, I am counted a sensible woman, isn't that?" So I said I had heard as much from her before. "What then, Clara, far? Mamma, mark my words, ponder and digest them. That was no living man. Your Henry saw, and who we couldn't see. It was a spirit." I flopped down into a chair all of a heap as Aunt took up her needles, and after a look around the room began working again with her face turned to the door and glancing up now and then as if she expected something or somebody, a spirit, a ghost. "You don't mean it, say?" "You're only playing Christmas on me, Aunt Agnes," I said at last. "I wish I could, Clara. But I am sure from your child's description of the man that it's the old vicar, what the dead vicar, yes, the one that was drowned. He can't rest in his grave, or I should say, he can't rest in the sea. 'Cause he wasn't buried? Did he fall into the sea then?" I asked. "He jumped in," whispered my aunt as she glanced fearful likey around the room. "It was riding out from here one winter's day. It was the 19th of December 80 years ago. Today in the afternoon." "Well," said I as she paused, "he was going over to the nunnery." "Yonder," continued my aunt, putting down her needles again, "and wanted to go by way of the beach. It was mounted on his black horse, Neff, or fine sensible beast, and the red vicar rode him at the cliff. Mercy on us, go on, Aunt. But the horse wouldn't jump the cliff, and the vicar, heaven forgive him, swore he'd go no other way. He whipped and spurred the animal, but he wouldn't budge at last. The vicar got into a towering passion. He dismounted, gave his horse a cut with a whip, took off his gilt. Spurs put them in his tail pocket and swearing. He would go his own way, leap down from the cliff. Was he killed dead? As mutton, replied Aunt Agnes, he sometimes appears. Spurs in hand, sometimes booted and spurred, ready to mount his house again. Many have seen him, and something always happens after he's been seen. We ought to tell the vicar, for something will surely happen before Christmas. Clara, I was silent the IDE of walking up the avenue at that time of the evening while a ghost was haunting the place was awful. Besides, Henry couldn't be left alone in the lodge, and I said so. Aunt Agnes made no reply. "Has the ghost ever appeared before?" I asked after a pause of silence, which was almost more dreadful than anything. "Yes," she replied in a low voice. "He has come 3 times, and every time something has happened. Once the church was robbed. There never had been a sacrilege here, nor since the next time, Fillion. A brave lad of 11 was killed in the lane yonder by some most mysterious means. And the storm, for a tempest always accompanies the appearance. And the last time the Manor house was burgled, as Captain French called it, robbed, he meant. Well, Aunt, we can't go up to the vicarage tonight." I said if the storm should come on, we might get drenched, and I'm sure I would die if we met. "The ghost, hush," said my aunt suddenly. "Listen, don't you hear something?" I listened with all my ears, and after a minute I fancied I could distinguish a moaning sound which rose and fell in a curious dull roar. But in the choir to intervals, we could distinctly hear the clatter of a horse's feet. The sound came nearer and nearer. The animal was galloping like mad. No one could have ridden at such a pace, I should say, on such a night along the country road. My aunt met a dart at me and caught me by the arm. "Clara, we're dead to a certainty. This is Neff. The galloping horse, the red Vicar's horse. Listen." We stood up close together, trembling like aspens. The noise came nearer and passed in a few seconds. It died away in the distance. I went to the casement and threw it open. The murmuring sound was quite audible. "It's the sea," whispered my aunt. "The storm is brewing. Shut the window." "Clara, I bid you." I shut it and sat down then. After a spell of thinking, I said, "Aunt Agnes, I don't believe that horses have ghosts, and even so, they wouldn't make that clatter. Perhaps we've been mistaken after all." "Rubbish," she replied. "I must say, Clara, I'm surprised I thought you had more sense with this remark." Clock was striking 9. Being a full half-hour slow, my aunt took up a candlestick from the little sideboard and walked away without even bidding me good night. "Cornish manners, perhaps," I muttered to myself. But Cornish or not, no one shall make me believe in the phantoms of dead horses rushing about country roads before 12 at night anyway. But we hadn't done with the ghosts yet. Chapter 2. The Man on Horseback. In the morning, the wind was blowing like mad. The trees were all bending in the direction away from the sea, and the roar of the wind in the branches added to the loud murmur of the waves on the beach, made up a most alarming noise to one not accustomed to ghostly storms. There wasn't much rain, not heavy rain, but it made up in thickness and drifted in like smoke and steam, wetting everything in a second and tasted of salt, but notwithstanding the weather, and I determined to go up to the vicarage and warn the vicar about the ghost of his forerunner. "There's something going to happen," I kept saying, until at last I began to wish that something would happen to her tongue. For a while we struggled through the avenue facing the seaway against the wind, and in about 10 minutes we came in sight of the house amongst the bare trees which were bending and tossing and complaining about the way in which the wind was treating them. We went boldly up to the side door around a laurel and hydrangea bushes and inquired for the vicar. The young girl who came to the door told us we couldn't see him. He was very busy packing and would be off up to London in the afternoon. "Going to London," exclaimed my aunt. "Why, who's to Christ? And Mary Hadwin's child the day after tomorrow, and all arranged special." "I'm sure I don't know," replied the girl. "He told me this morning he wasn't to be disturbed when I knocked at his door. Mrs. Mumbles has a holiday, and George the groom is off after the May. Master goes at 4 a nice time to go riding about on Cornish roads." I thought, which way is he going up to London?" I asked, but bless you, the girl didn't know why. If it had been me, I would have found out all about it in no time. She hadn't been long at the vicarage, I supposed. She was purr enough anyway. But prettier than any widow should have in his house, in my opinion. Rubbish, said my aunt afterwards, and him an old man of over 60 and a real old gentleman, too. Rubbish, Clara. Rubbish or not, I didn't like that girl and said so. But as we couldn't see the vicar and weren't likely to, he being engaged and packing up, we had to go home again, driven up the avenue by the wind, and continually having to turn around and face it because of its interference with our skirts, regular bother on a windy day. And lucky we were in private. What did that HT young woman say about the groom and the May? Aunt, says I. As we turned away home, George has gone after it somewhere. I wonder what will the Vicar do without it? He has only the one animal. Aunt, said I, stopping and turning round to the wind. Listen to me. Don't you remember that we heard a runaway animal last night, pounding down the road in a terrible way? Perhaps the Vicar's May was frightened and ran away when the ghost of the other horse came into the stable. My aunt shook her head and then settled a bonnet and hair being flustered. Clara, my dear Mark, my words. There's a great danger hanging over this place. A magpie darted out of our copse this morning, and the chimney smoked, which is sure signs, mercy on us. Listen to the wind. There'll be wrecks tonight and the springtide too. Come home. We struggled on and didn't dare to put our noses outside the cottage all day. You never saw anything like that storm. The wind tore up the trees and smashed branches. Birds were dashed to pieces on the perpendicular tower of the church. I jacked doors, were killed in the very roof, found dead in the gutters on the next Sunday. The swish of the rain and the clouds of spray which were swept over the cliff. You'll hardly believe great masses of white stuff came up that hill. Like birds, people told me, and next day, when we were all on the run, because of the vicar, I myself saw lumps of foam lying in the fields. Little Henry was afraid of the roaring in the chimney, and we were glad enough, I can tell you, when one of the keepers came in about 6 o'clock to see how we were. He trembled a bit when we told him about the ghost. We'll keep a lookout tonight, he said, as he went away up to the village, buffeted by the wind and regularly blowing around the corner. Why will they keep a lookout, Aunt? I asked. Because of the Vic's ghost, she replied. It's sure to appear in the church tonight, at least. It's said to come there and walk a dim light like a corpse. Candle is to be seen by those who have the courage to go out. You'll hear the people presently. I've never seen a ghost. I began. You don't mean that you think of going out to look for it? Shouted Aunt, staring at me as if I had 7 heads. Well, if others go, why shouldn't I? Nothing from the next world can harm us, I said. Can't it? She retorted with a sniff. An appearance killed poor young Filion. And he 11 years old. He was out in the storm, and wasn't he? Well, suppose he was, would the storm crush his skull in and lay him by the roadside? A tangled corpse. No winders ever blew could punch in people's skulls. Don't tell me there's true, real danger out tonight. It's terrible. So it is, of course. I said no more. The storm seemed abating, and about 10 we were both thinking of going to bed, when a quiet knocking was heard at the door. We sat still as mice and looked at each other. My aunt's face was the color of tallow, and a D. Say mine wasn't much better. I couldn't stir an inch to save my life. The ghost had come again. It's there, gasped my Aunt. Mercy on us, pray, Clara. If you'll credit me, I couldn't. I could no more repeat a prayer that minute, though. Were 6 at my finger ends and all the creed on the tip of my tongue. No use. I couldn't speak. And the knocking continued. Suddenly, my aunt whispered, Send the boy. It won't hurt him. Send Henry in his night dress, too, to meet a wandering ghost of a suicided parson, not. You wouldn't catch me sacrificing an innocent lamb like him to the evil one. I rose up there myself and with a quaking at my heart and a quaver in my voice, called out, "Who's there? It's me." "Robinson," replied the keeper. "I've heard a rumor, as there's something up at the vicarage, and have come down to see after it." My aunt, by this time, was behind me and opened the door without a blush, saying, "Come in, Mr. Robinson. Whatever is it, the ghost? We thought it must be you." "No, ma'am, not the ghost. Phyllis, our neighbor's lass, has come down with the cream, and a story is there's no one in the house, and there's a light in the church, moving about robbers," I exclaimed. "Ghosts," cried my aunt. "I knew it." "Well, it's a queer thing, and we're going to see about it." "The girl's gone with the master, the do-say-what girl," shrieked Aunt Agnes. "Not the per hussy up at the house, surely," said I. "That's it," he said. "Susan has bolted, and someone has reported. She was seen with the master on the coast road this afternoon." "The old goose," I cried. "What did I tell you, Martha? I took that girl's measure pretty quick." "Well, nothing will persuade me that the vicar has gone with her outside the paths of duty, no. Clara Farmer, vicar, a clergyman, and ghosts from the churchyard wouldn't persuade me otherwise. Besides, who'd go along the beach road such a night as this?" "It ain't so out of the way, bedad now," remarked Robinson. "I'm going down. I'll go with you," said I. "Well, I ain't going to be left like an owl in an ivy bush," said my aunt. "It's too terrifying. I'll go too." "But the child," I cried. "Suppose he wakes up?" "Oh, he won't stir. It's only 10 minutes or so. He's old enough to lie quiet. If he does work, he'll see the candles lighted." So we agreed to run down and see the ghost. The rain had ceased. Escorted by Robinson, who had a lantern, we soon reached the churchyard, which was close by near the village side, by the inn where the stream is in the road. And at the stile we found every living soul in the place. Outside, the night was pitch dark. The great perpendicular tower was quite lost in the gloom. The trees tossed about and roared. The ivy fluttered and rustled in a most alarming way, and sure enough, inside there was a light which moved about the chancel and the east window, which was half choked with ivy, but no one would venture near the doors, and we couldn't hear any sound but the terrible roaring of the wind and a banging noise. At times, suddenly the light went out, and we all jumped. Then, in the darkness, and in the middle of the roaring of the storm wind, which seemed increasing, the sound of a horse's hooves were heard clattering down the hill. "It's a horse!" the horse cried. The women, and before you could wink, every man, woman and child present, took to their heels and ran for dear life to the houses. Anywhere they had all squeezed themselves into doorways and sheds, like a general post in the nursery games at the manor. In 1 minute the clattering hooves came nearer and nearer. I was squeezed into the indo. I couldn't tell what had become of Anton the keeper. I wished my husband had been there. But it was no use wishing. The hoofs came down the hill faster and faster, banging fire out of the flints, as we could see the ghost rode right up to the road and stopped for a moment. Then he made up his mind and came towards the inn. The women pushed back and shut the door with a bang in its face. Now, would it blast us with fire or come in through the door? We waited, shaking and quaking, to see what would happen. And then we heard a noise and a loud kicking or thumping at the door. Nobody dared move. Besides, it was after closing time. No one could be admitted, but the rider would not be denied. Mr. Hawkin, I say, Hawkin, open the door. There's my chief about." I muttered, "Hawkin, and it shall remain outside." "Go your ways in peace," he said aloud. Go on, come." "No, nonsense," shouted the ghost. "If it was a ghost, which I, for one, began to doubt, open the door, and I'll smash it in. Don't you know me, George?" "Sim, George from the vicarage," cried several. "Why, what brings you here at this time of night on horseback, too?" said others. "Maybe it's only a device of the evil one," suggested the sexton. I'd be careful if that was you. Mr. Hawken, but a sounding kick and a few hard Cornish words settled the question. Hawken went to the door expostulating loudly against violence and ghosts. Chapter 3. The Ghosts in the Church, a Discovery, Ghosts be hanged, exclaimed George as he strode into the passage, having slipped the bridle over a hasp in the wall. What's all this mean? What's what mean? Asked Hawken, who with us all was recovering his composure. The other people who had run away were gradually coming out like rabbits from their burrow after a shot has alarmed them. By all this about Master and Susan, the house is locked up. Master's away and everyone's not at home. What's up? It's the vicar's ghost. George, it's in the church, CH. Nonsense, exclaimed the groom. We've seen it, cried his audience. Senor, grandmother, retorted the groom, who was perhaps nearer the truth than he knew or suspected. Where's Master gone to London? Who says so? Asked the man, turning on the speaker. It's not true, he wouldn't go like that, young man, I said, pushing my way nearer. I can tell you, it is true, Mrs. Jacamaya, and me went up to see your master this day, and that mink named Susan said he was packing up. Now you see why she and he have gone off? Why, she was as good as promised to me, cried poor George. Some of your guess is that George, we do, muttered some sympathetic voices. We almost knows it well. Then is it natural that she'd go and run away with my master? As honorable a gentleman has ever stepped, nah. There's something behind all this. It's the vicar's ghost. George, he came last night and let Comet loose, I suppose. Rubbish, but why she bolted, or how I couldn't make out. I must say she did both then. George won, and opened the stable door into the bargain. I've been after her ever since daylight, and found her in Sadler's farmyard off by Ferry Bridge. Yonder had been on her tracks for hours. I wish Mr. Mulholland or Squire Driven was home. We could fix up something, then what shall we do? Mr. Hawken find out what's inside the vicarage or in the church? Some sensible man in the crowd said. All very well, but we're incapable of it, said the groom. Besides, Keys is in the Vicar's study, remarked the Sexandrat. That ghost they should be laid by now. Listen to the wind. Someone's busy tonight, man. You can't tell who's listening. Let's up to the vicarage and go in if us can. Said the sensible man again. That's it, I cried. Perhaps it's only a trick. The vicar may be playing on you, playing ghost, and Susan gone off. Not likely, but come up to the parsonage. I think we may get in by the study window. Mr. Atkins, don't call it burglary now. No, replied the S voice. I'll not arrest you, George. Come along, then. I discovered that the constable, the only one for miles around, was the most sensible of all. Certainly we did find out queer things that night, as everyone never suspected Mr. Atkins of such gifts, he being mostly silent. The landlord, who, as the saying goes, could talk the H like of a donkey, was looked on as far the cleverest man and the most gifted. But he didn't hide his candles under or in any way I could see. And the very idea of candles made me think of Henry, in the cottage asleep all alone. We better go up, I thought. Just then Aunt Agnes came to me and said, Why, here you are. Clara, I'm going home quite right. Aunt? It's dreadfully stormy, says I will. You find your way, easy, quite easy with the lantern, she said. There's no ghost, I don't believe in. There is rheumatics. Don't be late, Clara, now, but bring me the news. I promised to do so. And she toddled off with another woman who lived top of the hill. Then, being easier in my mind, I went with a crowd to the parsonage, and the groom accompanied by the policeman to see fair play. Put himself inside the study window by the light of lanterns, which flashed about like big fireflies, throwing queer shadows on the walls and making giants of small people, sprawling them out on the sides of the house like imps. The constable handed the groom a light into the study, and then the window was shut down In a moment or two, candles were lighted within, and then George came into the hall with a light to open the door to the constable. "Now, you can't all be coming in," said he. "The vicar wouldn't like his house trampled on. Maybe he's inside all the time, so stand back." The people didn't like this. They began to grumble. "Parson wouldn't mind," they said. "Well then, I won't have it," said the constable. "We'll have a few Mr. Hawkin here and Mr. Robinson, Mrs. Hawkin, and the lady yonder, who's a friend of the family from London. I understand this was myself. We 6 will do all there is to be done, and let you know. So keep quiet, or I'll have you charged a truro. 6 is plenty." "Sir, we," Forrest said, feeling quite certain of our own share in the matter. "Plenty," assented the groom. "Now, we're 4 men and 2 women. Let us divide and take a lady with each party who'll go upstairs and who, down his eye, happened to rest on mine." So I said, "Let's begin upstairs. And you try the basement very well." He said, "I with Mr. Hawkin and the missus will go below. Mr. Atkins with you, and Mr. Richardson will begin at the top, and we'll meet in the drawing room yonder upstairs when we've finished. Now quiet, please, all of you. Any news you'll hear quick enough." The people in the hall stood quiet, and as we ascended the staircase, we could hear the terrible howling of the wind, and fancied that we could distinguish the thunder of the waves beating on the rocky coast. As the tide came in, it was a terrible night for the ghost. "That's Mr. Penlyon's room," whispered the constable as we passed the door. "Should we try it, or go on?" he asked, holding up his candlestick. "Go on and work down," said Mr. Robinson. So we went on, and very soon examined the upper rooms. Susan's apartment was first visited. Very few things were visible in it. A dress hanging up behind the door, a trunk and some bandboxes, pair of old boots, and some other articles thrown anyhow on the bed and on the floor. Didn't look like the trim, tidy maid we'd seen that morning. She had evidently been hurried in her movements. "She's bolted, I should say," remarked the constable. "She's taken light things and left her box." "What's in it, I wonder?" "Clothing such as became a waiting woman, a few books and some letters. But the clothes were new and clean. A pair of boots attracted my attention. They were rather large. Fine foot she had," I remarked as I took them up. "Why, what's these?" I stopped again and pulled from under her. Clean things, a pair of trousers, checked pattern, which had evidently been worn a good deal. "This is a queer start," said the constable. "Laytun, turn out the jades box at once." We did so very quickly, and the rest of a suit of male attire, such as might be worn by a lad of 16 or so. A flash suit, the constable called it well, so. "Miss Susan was fond of masquerading," said he. After inspecting the clothes, did anyone ever see in boy clothes? I wonder, while he was pulling about the trunk, I opened the drawers in the dressing table and found a large quantity of false hair nicely done up in another place. Were combs and brushes, paste rouge and powders, and brushes like painters. Camel hair things, so she could alter her face as she pleased. "The hussy," I remarked. As a glance. She was a bad one, I told my aunt. "So look at those things. A regular painted Jezebel." The men were surprised, I can tell you. "Ah, she's a bad one," said the constable suspect. "She's bolted with some valuables, not with Mr. Penlyon at all." "She's a thief," never said Robinson. "The two was together, that's certain as sin. Come you and see further. Here's George and his party coming up." "What cheer, George?" "Nothing in particular. Plate chests locked all right. Cellar locked too. Can't find the silver candlesticks, though, in the pantry bedroom. Pair likely in master's room." "Well?" "We found nothing upstairs but Susan's things including a lovely head of hair." Said Mr. Atkins, "George, Sim started a head of hair," he exclaimed. Staring at the speaker, "I never mind. Now come into the Vicar's room." "Ooh, why, it's locked." "There's no key locked," we exclaimed in a chorus. Then he must have gone, we thought, everyone. drew back and looked in turn at everyone else. "Leave it till we searched elsewhere," said sensible Atkins, "and if we find any more suspicious things or don't find something to satisfy us, then by George, I'll break the door. Where's the church keys in Parson's study?" piped the sexton. "They're hanging on a nail behind the pressed door." We all hurried into the study. The keys were not there. Curiosity now was getting to a high pitch. We no longer minded the storm. "Their keys is in the church door," squeaked a lad who just entered. I felt him in the lock. "I did." "You're a sensible idiot," Ben cried, the constable putting on his hat. "Now them lanterns come along." We hurried out and went boldly enough into the churchyard and up the gloomy path between the graves of the dead. Graves of people who had been drowned or cast ashore dead, or who had died in their beds, men mostly, as I'd already seen. We reached the church porch, and as the lantern was held up to the lock of the old oak door, we perceived the key dangling from the keyhole. The door was locked too. By this time our fear of the ghost had considerably subsided, and notwithstanding the howling of the storm and the rushing gusts of wind, around the church little hesitation was shown. Mr. Atkins was quite bold, and several of his immediate followers were brave enough. The hinder ones came in with the lights being fearful to remain outside in the dismal darkness and whirling wind. Mr. Atkins, leading the way and carrying a lantern, stepped up between the old carved pews on which scenes of Scripture were engraved with doves and eagles and coats of arms. He stood still near the font and called out loudly, "Is anyone here?" No one replied except an echo in the chapel. So he shouted again. This time we heard a moan come from the east end, and a terrible chill struck me. I dare say others felt the same. We had shivers. It was a very weird feeling. The shadowy church just light enough to make the darkness visible. The howling wind in the belfry overhead. The dangling ropes and humming bells, all united to make our flesh creep. And then the moan was so sad and weary, keeping close together the men in the front. We straggled up the aisle and examined the chancel. No one was there except ourselves. But within the communion rails, near the vestry door, lying prone on the floor, quite exhausted, was an elderly woman. "Why, it's Mrs. Mumbles," cried 2 or 3 of the spectators. "Oh, did she come here? Never mind how she came. Let's get her out." "The light's accounted for now," said George. The fainting woman was raised up and carried out to the inn, where she found voice enough to say, "Robbed, murdered the master some of us needed." No more. Mr. Atkins rushed away, followed by Robinson, George, myself, and the Hawkins. We all guessed that the secret of Penlyon's disappearance lay in the bedroom, which was locked. Robbery and murder are ugly words. A few well-directed blows stove the door in, and the men entered first with lanterns and candles. Sure enough, on the floor under the bed was the old vicar himself. Mr. Penlyon dabbled in blood and apparently lifeless. The private safe was ransacked. The chest of drawers turned out many papers, and some valuable articles were on the floor. Everything was topsy-turvy, but someone who knew the place had been there, for the secret drawers were forced open by. By this time the ghost was entirely forgotten, and the doctor was quickly fetched from his house, about 3/4 of a mile away. He came, and having examined the poor vicar, concluded that he had had a severe blow on the head, would come round. The gentleman then went and prescribed for Mrs. Mumbles, and the people gradually dispersed after leaving a nurse, with the parson and George downstairs, to see what was missing from the chests, which had been robbed and locked up again. Mr. Atkins stayed also, but I made my way home with Mr. Robinson, and reached my aunt's cottage as the clock was weeing out 1. "Well said, Aunt Martha. A pretty time in the morning to come home. And with Mr. Robinson." "What's the matter then?" I told her, and her face was a caution. "I knew it. I said so. The ghost did it. Is the vicar dead?" Not yet, I replied, but I'd have those two villains hanged if I had my way. A pair of ruffians. Burglars, both wicked men, has ever stepped. What men? Do you mean Clara? She asked. Why, the men who robbed and nearly killed Mr. Penlyon? Susan and you said men, Clara interrupted. Aunt, and isn't Susan a man? Of course he is. A made-up young villain who bamboozled the old vicar and nearly canoodled George the groom. I saw through the paints and the false hair. Yes, I told you he was no good. Let's get to bed, said Aunt Mara, who never could bear anyone to have praise. If she had found it out, there would have been hot water and something for a late supper with a chat before bedtime. I know, but there was no sign of it. So we went to bed tired out, and a little thirsty too, next morning. We were astir pretty early, and in the village after a short breakfast, everyone was chattering. Mrs. Mumbles had said something, but being short of teeth at the best of times, was indistinct, being upset, and no wonder we made out that a man had called on the previous night, a red-faced man, and made some inquiries. He then must have gone round to the stables and loosed Comet, which he galloped up the avenue and off over the hill. At any rate, the mare, being frightened, went off at speed, and when he had thrown her out, the man must have left her and made his way back to the vicarage in the morning. Early, with the assistance of Susan, he seized and stunned the vicar. Susan had previously locked old Mumbles in the church and said she was away on a holiday. This put people off. George was after the May. Mumbles locked up, and the burglar, who he took for a ghost, packed up all he could find with his friends. As assistants, Susan had taken service there as a maid in order to bet it carry out the robbery, which yielded a quantity of plunder in silver plate money and objects of value, all which Miss Susan knew very well where to find. For the vicar was wealthy. These particulars came out by degrees and meantime while we were discussing the ghost and the robbery. The previous appearances on the same day in former years and their consequences. The men on horseback and on foot were searching roads and paths, sending flying telegrams all over the district, even launching boats when the weather moderated. We females also tried to find the runaways, and some of us at low tide investigated the caverns on the shore where, in old times, smugglers used to hide themselves in their plunder, and in one of these great recesses, the burglar's plunder was found. Worse than that, the body of the pretty fair-skinned boy who had played parlayed and deceived even George S. was discovered dead. He looked asleep, but was cold and stiff. The traces of seaweed and bits of driftwood beside and around him showed how he had died. The high spring tide had overwhelmed him in his sleep and suffocated him in the cave. Higher up was a bag, a heavy small sack containing most of the plunder. Of the older burglar we found no trace, whether he had escaped or had been carried off by the sea. No one ever knew, and I don't think anyone cared. But many of us were sorry for the lad, a pretty dark-haired boy, about 16, with handsome features. As we saw him first on the beach with a dress skirt on over his other clothes, he looked like a pretty sleeping girl. Some women cried, and not a man said a word against him. The vicar would have buried him had he been well enough after the first inquest inquiry, but some other gentleman did found drowned, was the verdict, and the handsome boy was put underground in a nameless grave. It was very sad indeed, and I'd rather not say any more about it. Some people came to the conclusion that the Vic's ghost was all nonsense, but it isn't. The ghost appeared long before the robbers made it an excuse for robbing the vicarage. We think the burglaries were done by the same man who made bold by impunity. Tried a big stroke at last. What became of him? We can't tell why he left the cave. We can only guess. Perhaps he meant to return and was prevented by the high tide or swept away by the waves while trying. Or perhaps he fell down the rocks and was washed away at any rate. We never heard of him again and don't want to hear. Mr. Penlyon recovered, but could give little account of the incidents. Mrs. Mumbles told us how she found a piece of candle in the vestry and walked about the church, hoping someone would release her. She called out and beat the door. But we were all too frightened to go near the ghost. As we thought her, we had not a very merry Christmas after all these tragic events, but Aunt and I, little Henry and his father, who came down, managed to enjoy ourselves. We left the village without hearing any more of the Vicar's ghost on New Year's Eve. And I was not sorry to be home near Cardumana once again. You might be one of those people like me who doesn't like the stories to be interrupted with ads, and this podcast has ads on it. However, there is a solution if you would like access to the stories without ads and a link to a library of all the stories I've ever done that you can download. Without ads, you can get that by becoming a patron. So if you join for $5 or the equivalent in your currency a month, you can have all the stories and free. So consider becoming a patron, though. Patreon. ton.com/SLBARCUD. So that was The Vicar's Ghost by Clara Farmer. And even now, there are people seething in Truro and Penzance over their eggnog because I did it in a North Country accent rather than a West Country accent. But I doubt the West Country of that story, you know. And when you look at Clara Farmer, there's not much to be said about her. That's the only story you can find. I got it from the Valencourt book of CHR Christmas Ghost Stories, which has been a very useful resource when I've been looking for Christmas ghost stories. But Clara of Clara Farmer, no, she's a ghost. What we do know is this. The Vicar's Ghost was published on December the 20th and 27th. So, day after Boxing Day and before Christmas, they knew they had their marketing. Then for Christmas stuff, didn't they? It was their Black Friday, really. You can't move away from Black Friday. Somebody was saying about Black Friday, you know, can you get discounts on food or rent or anything at all useful? No, but you can get the new electronic thing and some more electronic nonsense that you don't really want. But you can get that. But heavily marketed like this. Like Christmas is really so, 20th, 27th, 1890, late Victorian period. So as I say, it was put in the Valencourt book of Victorian Christmas Ghost Stories. Volume 3, I can find nothing about Clara Farmer. It's interesting that the protagonist is also called Clara, which I thought was quite funny. Why do I not think it's a proper Cornish story, and it's set in Cornwall? But some of the terms of phrase seemed quite northern to me. The woman from top of the hill, not in my particular dialect of northern English, but in some, the definite article, in standard English, is elided completely. Yeah, it just doesn't exist. Sometimes we'd say that as Gandon tone. We wouldn't say, I'm going down to the town, the T and the T have kind of come together. So what is the history of the Northern English T? They don't say it in Scotland, and they don't say it Northumberland, so it would appear that it comes from those areas have been Scandinavian IED during the early medieval period. The Dan law and those parts of England that were heavily influenced by Scandinavian speech. So if you know German, you have DD and das T goes to S. In German, like Cornish, funnily enough, although Cornish isn't related. But so that, and in Dutch, it's H, and it's related to it, of course, in standard English, so it's the Nea version. So that it was in Old English, think about the famous Yorkshire song on Illamore Bat, a Bart, is without but T-hat. Yeah, the hat, so in Northern English dialects. I hope I'm not losing you. The is usually T, just the T sometimes. That disappears completely. And in this story, it disappeared a couple of times. Woman from top of the street or whatever, yeah. That just felt northern to me. Also Pew Muker. Hey. Yeah, that's Cornish, but Mookie sounds more man's. or Irish or from Galloway in southwest of Scotland. Fillion again. Fillion is a Gaelic name. It's not a Cornish name. Also, she goes back to Cardew Manor now. Cardew is a Bronic name Lee in Cornish, meaning the black fort, probably black fortified farm. But Cardew is actually up in the north of England. It's near Cara where I am, so I don't think this. I think she was a northerner. It was published in the Express and Advertiser when I do my due diligence on where was this paper. The Express and Advertiser appears to be a Lancer paper. It appears to be from Burnley, so I actually think that this is a northerner writing a story set in Cornwall, okay? This is a very, very long way of me justifying why I didn't do it in a Cornish accent. The simpler reason, of course, is I would have sounded like a pirate all the way through, and all the people in K would have been writing comments, like people do. I did Madame Crow's Ghost, which was written by an Irishman, but is written in Northern English dialect. And I did it in my grandmother's accent, which nobody really... It's died out. I mean, some of the old people still speak like that, the old Cumberland accent, but some fell. I complained about that, and he said that nobody talked like that. He said that it was a mix of Middlesbrough, in which I can get like, 'cause I think we do talk like folk from Middlesbrough, and what else did he say? Middlesbrough and Cumin, which it was, and Sheffield. Well, I didn't get that at all, because I have a lot of time for a Sheffield accent, which I find most euphonious. But it's not like a Cumberland accent at all. Anyways, that's that, so that's how I did it. Yes, indeed, I'm on the run to Christmas. We put our Christmas lights up outside, but not inside. I've got the Christmas decorations out, but I'm waiting for the permission from Sheila. Anyway, I suppose this is a long way of me saying there's not a ton of things to say about the story. I thought it was fun. I thought her characterization was great. I thought she absolutely acutely observed the manners of the provincial country folk, and that isn't an insult at all. Because I'm very fond of the provincial country folk. Possibly being one of them myself, and and the way they interact with each other and their attitudes, I thought was great, Martha. You could probably tell I really enjoyed doing it. And the way she talked about Aunt Agnes when she chastised the little boy Henry, and it is just like, not having any children herself, which was a backhanded dig, really. And there's some reason I think the inference there was that she was too ugly, that this is why she never had children. I think I may have missed that, or I may have been unkind in thinking that. But I think that's what Clara Farmer was trying to say. Almost Deanan characterizations, comic characterizations, really, of Mrs. Mumble and the handsome cabin boy. He felt like he should be a cabin boy, Susan, the handsome cabin boy, Susan. So as I was reading that, I thought, well, isn't that a turn-up for the books? Was she, normally in our times, these things of men passing as women have become a current and popular discourse, and certainly controversial. But was she foreshadowing our, I don't think she was, to be fair. I think it was just a thing. Men have always dressed up as women, and women have always dressed up as men, and, I don't have a problem with that, so there we are. Yeah. It is a case of what we call the explained supernatural. So I've said this before when talking about ghost stories. What happened was, science came along in the Enlightenment, and there was basically, if scientists got themselves interested in religious matters, they got burned alive, so an agreement was made for a split where the church would look after your spiritual aspect. And you other people, your scientists, can go off and do the material, so that led to a weird fixation on the material, whereby there is no spiritual in it. And this became the most popular discourse and so we end up with materialism, and later physicalism. And people like Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, and people like this still think this wrong. Of course, I say that. But they're still wrong. I know Richard Dawkins is a super-duper genius, but he's still wrong. Oh, the idea was that everything was physical, and anything supernatural, it didn't exist. It was either a lie or delusion of a fool, really. And so what happened was, in the mid-18th century, late 18th century, and throughout the Victorian period, you have the kind of polite discourse, which is to say, I shew the supernatural because if you believe in stuff like that, you're a credulous fool and you won't be accepted in polite company, so. And of course, at the same time, there's that strand. But the other strand is that these stories are vulgar in the sense of they deal with vulgarness of heightened emotions on the dark side. So this is comic. But the whole Gothic thing, this leads me to say something about the division between detective stories. Of course, I have the detective stories, channeling ghost stories. But, the Gothic story is full of frights. It was full of manipulating emotion, and it tended towards spectacle. And so spectacle is where emotion is just deployed for the sake of emotion, like a jump scare. What does it mean? Does it have any larger part to play in the story or characterize it? No, it's dropped there just 'cause it's like Dumbo, the flying elephant. What is the point of Dumbo now? Come on. Somebody's going to write me a comment about pointing out how important Dumbo is, and I'm not saying he isn't. I loved the film when I went to see it when it came out, when I was a very small boy. But you see what I'm saying about sensation, so. And it's like sort of 1980s gore horror. A lot of that is just spectacle. It's only intended to generate an emotion, and this is done a lot. News do it a lot as well, of course, because strong emotion sells it, and we are interested. We are drawn. We are magnetized by strong emotion, whether that be horror, whether that be, soy love, And that can be vulgar as well, can't it? If it's too crass or too insipid. I don't mean crass and sugary sweet. We're like, teenagers know that they go all the time. Whether they do anymore, I don't know. I certainly used to do that as a teenager and still do, but so strong emotion classically pornography, and so many stories are written just to titillate or push this emotion, and the Gothic was the origin of all of them. Really, I think the Gothic is the origin of pornography. Well, there's always been pornography, but pornographic novels, if you like. I think it's the origin of horror novels. I think it's the origin of detective novels. We have to take a step forward. So often the Gothic was mysterious. There were mysteries that needed to be resolved, and they often were to do with legacies and wills, and somebody not being who they thought they were. That their father was actually a French aristocrat, whereas they were brought up as a pig-herd son, swineherd son. That another point there is the word burglarize, which she doesn't use because, of course, in British English, you don't burglarize, you just burgle. And I'm going to tell you something that I hope doesn't offend you too much. On this side of the so-called pond, we have been known to smile. Riley had the tendency of our American cousins to add syllables to perfectly normal words, and burglarize is a case in point. It's like taking a noun, a burglar, and adding that suffix "ize" to it, where there's a perfectly good verb anyway. To burgle, as Talkling will let you know. Anyway, I hope you're not offended by that, but I thought I'd let you in on the secret, so I don't want you to be wrong-footed in any discussions, and you can deploy that now, and you can go. If you're speaking to some snooty Brit, and you're not a snoy Brit like myself, you can say H. I know you think this, but, and then you can say, there's a very good reason to do that. Another tendency of American English is, of course, to use acronyms rather than, and British English uses shortenings. So, we would say telly for television. Whereas the American tendency with TV is to put things, and American speech is winning in this, because, I think even here we now use acronyms rather than our old faithful just shortening things, and making pet versions of the words. Anyway, I've wandered slightly from the story there. I was talking about detective stories and the Gothic. So the Gothic is full of mysteries that need to be resolved and uncovered. And it's not a long leap to end up with somebody who is uncovering. So you have, from the protagonist of the story that needs to do this, you end up with somebody who's a repeat solver, and you end up with the Amate sleuth in the early pose. Auguste Dupin is probably one of the earliest, if not the earliest, Amate sleuth. So from being just, instead of just being a maiden lost in a castle who has to work out who her dad is, who a real father is, and solve the mystery of the missing diamond or something, you get the repeat sleuths like of course, Sherlock Holmes, etc. And then you get the whole, and that catches on. And you get the whole, these arrow. You get all you repeat. Everybody's got Mrs. Kaggs. If you go on the Detective Monty Egg, you go on the Detective Story podcast. I've been doing, you'll find that nearly all writers get this character and they just deploy him or her in Miss Morel in story after story after story. Okay, the P.O. takes the Gothic sensation novel, if you like, with its shocks and its horrors and its mysteries, which were considered as I said before, utterly vulgar by the realist novelist of the 18th century. And therefore you get this split and ultimately, the Gothic is the source of science fiction as well, isn't it? So you have in the 18th century those realist novels, and the realist novels become literally fiction, where we have realistic descriptions of people being miserable in a cafe in New York in the rain, and nothing happens. And apart from, they're just sad, and they watch people through the window and ruminate about how crap their lives are, and then versus action-packed and plot-driven shocks, horror spectacle that we see in science fiction. Crime spy stories, which are a child of detective stories, thrillers, psychological thrillers. You see, horror stories, science fiction. I already said that, and pornography. So, which side are you on? I know which side Clara Farmer's on. Anyway, getting back to the story, but I think that was interesting. And then we get, so real we're going to circle back, as they say. And we're going to talk about the explained supernatural. I was talking about the evolution of the Gothic novel at a gallop. And talking about how it gave rise to all these other forms of genre fiction. But many of the authors of the sensational Gothic style novels right through the Victorian period were conscious they were being looked down on by their snooty, romantic and realist peers. Other writers they bit. They were considered the bottom of the pile. And so they would make and I said, to admit that you believed in superstitions and the spiritual aspect of life, apart from the carefully prescribed role of, in this case, the Church of England, that meant you were a fool, so what you tried to do was, but it wasn't really supernatural. And this, of course, leads to the evolution of Scooby-Doo. I said this many times. It leads ultimately to Scooby-Doo, which is, of course, I don't think it is modern anymore, but a sort of late 20th century example of the explained supernatural, which was started by Anne Radcliffe and her big romances in the 1790s. She was the mother. Mother Radcliffe, CID, called her that, and was she gave birth, and I don't like birthing either. You give birth, you don't have to make a verb of birth. I know I'm contradicting myself in gifting. I don't like that either. You give a gift, you know. Oh, I don't like those ones. Just call me old-fashioned. But, yeah, that's it. This is an example of the explained supernatural. And it could it? Because my point about the detective model novel is that this could have been on the Detective Channel, couldn't it easily? But it's a Christmas story, and it's got a ghost in it, except he isn't a ghost. Although there may be a ghost, because she leaves the door open to that suggestion at the end that even though the ghost wasn't the cause of any of these things, it was a handsome cabin boy. There may be a ghost still, yeah. But I thought it was very, very witty, and I loved her interactions with her aunt and her observations about all the village were these who weren't, who were drawn in comic style. But I didn't feel unkindly. They weren't kind of, sometimes villages are in books, you know, now even. But certainly, yeah. Now, even now, you get a folk horror story now, and the villages are evil, stunted, twisted, bigoted, emotionally and intellectually stunted. As I said, people, even in modern novels they are, and certainly this has been a theme, too, of the, metropolitan literarity, to look down their snouts at ordinary country folk myself. Although I live in a city now, so I don't know how that, but I've lived in the country a lot. Big show of hands fan, actually, as well, so there we are. That's probably all I want to say. Everything I tell you, especially if I say it 3 times, which is very why. Repeat myself, it's true or not, anyway. Christmas is coming. I'll probably end up doing at least 1 more before Christmas, maybe 2, but stay tuned. Oh yeah, and if you like what we do here, I say we. I am the queen. Oh, there we are. So if you like what I do here, without the royal plural, please share, tell your mates. Anyway, goodbye for now.